Warning disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction based on urban legends, whispered rumors, and haunted Hollywood folklore. Any resemblance to real people, living or dead, is purely coincidental. However, many believe that the glitz and glamour of Tinseltown hides a darker side, one of forgotten spirits, tragic secrets, and fame paid for in blood. Bogart's Ghost Stories, Hollywood Hauntings is not intended to harm the legacy of any historical figure, but rather to explore the myths that linger in the spaces they once walked. Some doors to the past should stay closed, but tonight you'll step through one. Claire Whitmore had always been obsessed with old Hollywood. The silver screen, the fashion, the elegance, and the timeless mystery behind every faded photograph. As a young documentary filmmaker trying to make a name for herself in Los Angeles, she spent her days interviewing forgotten stuntmen, visiting decaying film sets, and scouring estate sales for memorabilia. But nothing had prepared her for what arrived one humid Thursday afternoon. A yellowing envelope, no stamp, no return address, just her name, written in perfect 1950s cursive with fountain pen ink. Inside was a black and white photograph, brittle with age. Humphrey Bogart stood under a tall iron gate that read Seraphine Estate, cigar in hand, expression unreadable. But it was the message scrawled on the back that sent a chill down her spine. They still walk among us at night. No signature, no date. Claire stared at the words for a long time, her breath caught in her throat. She flipped the photo again and again, convinced it had to be a prank or some kind of viral marketing stunt. But a quick internet search revealed something even more interesting. The Seraphine Estate was a real place, a long-abandoned mansion tucked deep in the Hollywood Hills, shrouded in scandal and rumor hauntings. Once owned by a reclusive silent film star, it had changed hands multiple times before vanishing for public record. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed the letter on her desk, her mind already racing. She'd been looking for a subject for her next documentary. True crime? Too crowded. A celebrity profile? Too expensive. But this was something different. A lost mansion, an unsolved mystery, and the ghost of Humphrey Bogart? It was cinematic gold. Claire packed her gear and began mapping out the area. There are no recent photos, no clear roads, just vague mentions on old forums and urban exploration blogs. She reached out to a few local historians, and after some persistence, she was put in contact with someone named Mr. Lyle. Caretaker, the man had introduced himself curtly over the phone. You want to see the place? Come tomorrow. Sunset. Bring a flashlight. No cell reception out here. The next evening, Claire wound her way through twisting canyon roads until she found herself at the base of a long-forgotten driveway. Vines clawed at rusted iron gates, matching the ones from the photo. The estate loomed beyond, partially hidden by overgrown hedges and dying cypress trees. It didn't look like it belonged in modern L.A., more like a movie set left behind in another century. Mr. Lyle was already waiting, an older man in suspenders and a Panama hat, holding a heavy brass key. Without much small talk, he led her up the cracked stone path to the house. As they walked, he told her bits and pieces, how the estate had been a secret retreat for stars during the studio system era, how parties went on for days, and how several actors disappeared from public life shortly after staying there. There are things in there, he said, pausing at the heavy wooden front doors. Things the cameras weren't allowed to capture. Not then. Maybe not now, either. Claire's heart thumped as he turned the key. The door creaked open with a sound like a sigh from the past. Dust swirled in the fading sunlight, revealing Art Deco chandeliers, a grand piano with yellowed keys, and portraits with eyes that seemed to follow her. Claire stepped inside, camera rolling, unaware that this was not the beginning of her next film. It was the beginning of her own Hollywood haunting. The air inside the Seraphine Estate felt frozen in time. Dust motes danced in shafts of fading sunlight as Claire stepped further into the house, her boots echoing on polished but time-worn marble floors. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was loaded, like the whole house was holding its breath. Mr. Lyle closed the door behind them, and the muffled sounds of the outside world vanished completely. Claire gripped her camera tightly, already filming as her eyes scanned the grand hall lined with tarnished brass sconces and faded wallpaper. It was built in 1927, Mr. Lyle began, his voice low and steady, by a silent film actress named Vivian Seraphine. She was beautiful, mysterious, and, some say, dangerous. When talkies came along and ended her career, she vanished. But the estate stayed. It became a hideaway for actors with secrets. Bogart was one of them. Claire followed as he led her through archways and down echoing corridors. The mansion was massive, its scale hidden by the overgrown brush outside. Each room was more decadent than the last, though all were dust-covered and frozen in decay. A ballroom with cracked mirrored walls. A dining room with an untouched place setting for 12. A library where hundreds of books lay in haphazard piles, like someone had searched through them in desperation and fled mid-act. But what struck Claire most was the sheer number of photographs. All black and white, all mounted in elegant vintage frames. Some were posed Hollywood portraits. Marilyn Monroe blowing a kiss, James Dean leaning against a motorcycle. But others looked candid, secret, unguarded. In one, Bogart was caught mid-laugh beside a woman Claire didn't recognize. In another, Judy Garland stood at the bottom of a staircase, staring directly into the lens with terrified eyes. It made Claire pause. "Where did these come from?" she asked. "They say the house took them," Lyle said without blinking. "It watches. Always has." Claire chuckled nervously, hoping he was just being theatrical, but Mr. Lyle wasn't smiling. He continued walking until they reached a narrow hallway behind the staircase. The walls here were different, bare, cold, cracked plaster. No photos, just a long stretch of emptiness ending in a locked door. Lyle stopped and gestured toward it. "That's the basement," he said, voice suddenly hushed. "Off limits. That's where the worst stories come from." Claire raised an eyebrow. "What kind of stories?" He hesitated, then replied, "Rituals. Seances. Starlets trying to talk to lost lovers. Directors who wanted to be immortal. They say that door hasn't opened since 1956. Not even the owners could get it open. The last man who tried said he saw something staring back through the keyhole. After that, he never spoke again." She took a few steps closer, her camera aimed down the narrow corridor. A strange warmth pulsed beneath her skin. The hallway felt wrong, like the air was thicker here. Her stomach twisted slightly. She turned away. Back in the main hallway, Lyle led her upstairs. The second floor was even eerier. One room had a closet full of vintage clothes, untouched. Another contained an old film projector, still pointed at a peeling wall. "Some say Bogart would come up here to drink alone," Lyle said. Talked about shadows following him. About hearing lines from his own films whispered back at him through the walls. Claire knelt beside a nightstand in one of the rooms, scanning through its drawers. She found an old matchbook with Café Formosa stamped on it, the kind of place 1940s actors once drank away their fame. Behind it, a brittle page torn from a journal, with just one line scribbled in pencil. "They don't die here. They perform forever." That night, Claire stayed longer than planned, filming room after room, narrating her discoveries. The footage was incredible. The atmosphere was perfect. But even as she worked, she felt a growing sensation, like she was being watched. Not by Mr. Lyle, not by a person, but by the house itself. At one point, while reviewing footage in the hallway, she swore she heard a faint whisper. "Claire!" She turned quickly. "Nothing. Just darkness." "Who said that?" she called, her voice shaky. Lyle appeared moments later from the kitchen below. "Said what?" he asked, looking concerned. Claire didn't answer. She didn't want to sound crazy. But the whisper came again, quieter, right by her ear. "Stay." She looked up at one of the portraits on the wall, a candid shot of Humphrey Bogart. In the dim light, she could have sworn he was smirking. The next morning, Claire awoke in her apartment feeling like she hadn't slept at all. Her head was heavy, her dreams blurred and strange. Black and white flashes, echoes of voices, snippets of dialogue from old movies she hadn't watched in years. She shook it off and sat at her editing desk with her camera and laptop. The footage from the Seraphine estate was incredible, haunting, cinematic, filled with atmosphere. But as she scrolled through the clips, something unexpected made her freeze. In one shot, taken while she was walking down the hallway on the second floor, there was someone behind her. He wasn't there before. Claire had reviewed this angle at least twice already. But now, as she zoomed in, she could clearly make out the silhouette of a tall man in a fedora and trench coat standing just at the edge of the frame, behind the cracked door to the dressing room. His posture was stiff, and though his face was in shadows, his outline was unmistakably familiar. "Bogart," she whispered aloud to the empty room. Her heart thudded in her chest. She rewound and played the clip again. Same result. The figure stood still for 1 second too, then blinked out like a faulty reel burning through. No special effects. No audio distortion. It was clean, raw footage, and that made it even more terrifying. Brushing off the rising panic, Claire rationalized. It could be a trick of light, a shadow, or someone else on the property I didn't notice. She was trying to be logical, but her hands were trembling. The figure was too defined, too real. She could even see the faint gleam of what looked like cufflinks. The next clip made her stomach drop. In a footage taken just moments later, while Claire was interviewing Mr. Lyle on camera, the same man appeared in the mirror behind her. Only this time, he wasn't just standing. He was looking directly at her. His lips moved slightly, but no sound came out. Claire leaned in, heart racing. She adjusted the volume, slowed the video down, frame by frame. When his lips parted, she read the word clearly. "Warn." Claire sat back in her chair, the word echoing in her ears. Her skin felt clammy. The apartment, which moments ago had been cozy and quiet, now felt heavy, like the walls had shifted inward. Her breath came shallow and fast. She needed air. Grabbing her coat, she left her equipment behind and stepped outside into the cool Los Angeles morning. But as she reached the bottom of her apartment steps, a newspaper caught her eye, folded half open on her neighbor's porch. The headline, "Estate Sale Turns Tragic. Hollywood Hills Caretaker Found Dead in Fire." Her pulse stopped. She snatched up the paper and read further. The article described a blaze that had broken out late the previous evening at the Seraphine estate. The fire had been contained quickly, but Mr. Lyle was found unresponsive in one of the upstairs rooms. Authorities were unsure how the fire started. There had been no power in the house, no flammable materials nearby. Lyle's death was being ruled as undetermined. But what chilled Claire to the bone was the timestamp. The fire occurred shortly after she left the mansion. She didn't know what to do. Guilt, confusion, and fear collided inside her. Had she somehow caused it, or had something followed her home? That night, she slept restlessly. Her dreams turned violent. A cigarette burning in the dark. A woman scream. A piano playing a broken version of As Time Goes By. She jolted awake at 3:11 a.m., drenched in sweat, only to see her camera light blinking from her desk. It was recording. She hadn't turned it on. Claire walked over slowly, whispering, "What the hell?" She picked up the camera and played the clip. It showed her sleeping. From the foot of the bed, someone, or something, had been filming her. She fast-forwarded in horror. At the 11-minute mark, a figure stepped into the frame. Same silhouette, same trench coat. He stood there for a full minute before leaning toward the lens. This time, the voice came through clearly, a low rasp, unmistakable. "You opened the door. Now listen." The camera went black. Claire dropped the device and backed away, tears threatening to fall. She didn't understand what was happening, why Bogart's ghost was appearing to her, what door she had supposedly opened, or how Mr. Lyle had died just after warning her. But one thing was clear. This wasn't a story anymore. This was real. Claire didn't leave her apartment the next day. She couldn't. The weight of what she had witnessed, the footage, the fire, the voice, pressed on her like 100 pounds of invisible grief. She kept the blinds drawn and paced the room, trying to decide if she was losing her mind or if something from the Seraphine estate had truly followed her home. When the sun finally rose, she sat at her laptop and began researching in earnest, determined to unravel the truth before whatever haunted her took full control. Her first focus was Humphrey Bogart. Though a beloved legend in Hollywood history, his personal life had been full of contradictions. She combed through biographies, tabloid archives, and digital newspaper clippings. She discovered that during a brief window in 1951, Bogart vanished from public life for nearly 2 weeks. Official records stated he had been vacationing off the coast, but Claire found no hotel receipts, no public sightings, no proof he'd left Los Angeles at all. And strangely, a gossip column from that time mentioned a gathering of stars at a private retreat in the hills, never named, but described as an eerie place where laughter turns to silence and no one stays overnight. Digging deeper, she began pulling death records from the early 50s tied to lesser-known Hollywood actors, names like Delia Royce, Tommy Falcon, and Margaret Vale. All three were young, promising talents who had landed roles in major productions, only to disappear suddenly or die under mysterious circumstances. Their bodies were either found at home with no signs of trauma or never found at all. But what connected them, Claire discovered, was this. Each had been spotted at the Seraphine estate shortly before their final appearances. She stared at the screen, heart pounding. 3 deaths. 1 house. 1 connection to Bogart. Claire returned to the photograph that had started it all. This time, she examined it under magnification, using editing software to sharpen every detail. In the shadows behind Bogart's shoulder stood another figure, barely visible but present. It was a woman with dark curls and hauntingly pale eyes. She resembled Margaret Vale, the actress who had drowned in her bathtub in 1952 with no water in her lungs. Suddenly, the pieces began clicking together. The Seraphine estate wasn't just a place celebrities visited to escape the spotlight. It was a gathering site, maybe for spiritualists, maybe for something far darker. Claire dug into Hollywood's occult past, discovering that seances were more than a passing fad among the elite. In the 1940s and 50s, seances were hosted secretly in mansions like Seraphine, often involving Ouija boards, medium circles, and rituals drawn from ancient texts. One book kept appearing in her search, the Book of Eternal Performance, a rumored grimoire for those who wish to make their mark on the world forever. Claire found a scan of one of its pages through a forgotten paranormal forum. The text was cryptic, referencing the binding of identity through stage and spirit, and the house of mirrors where time cannot pass. Scribbled in the margin was a note. They perform until remembered. With shaking fingers, Claire searched property records. The Seraphine estate had gone through several shell corporations over the decades, many of them linked back to old production studios, RKO, Warner Brothers, Paramount. It was as if the house was being quietly protected or hidden. She even uncovered a redacted LAPD report from 1954 involving a mass disturbance at the property, including the mention of unidentified voices on recording equipment and psychological trauma among 4 officers. The report was stamped, closed, above clearance. What scared her most, though, was the last name that appeared in her research. Claire Whitmore. Her own name. She stared in disbelief. An actress with her same name, same spelling, was listed in the cast of a 1953 short film titled Twilight Stage, supposedly shot at the Seraphine estate. The film was never released, and no footage exists. The actress was 23, looked just like her, and disappeared before production wrapped. It wasn't just a coincidence. It felt like something deeper, like time was folding in on itself. Claire slammed her laptop shut, chest heaving. The whisper in her dream, the footage, Bogart's warning, it all made sense now. She hadn't just walked into a haunted house. She had walked into a loop, a trap, and now something wanted her to stay. Claire returned to the Seraphine estate 2 days after Mr. Lyle's death, this time without permission, keys, or backup. Something inside her had shifted, not just fear, but a driving urgency. She needed to find answers. She needed to understand why her name had appeared in connection with a ghost film from 1953 and why Bogart's spirit had sought her out. She parked her car along the side of the road, waited for nightfall, and slipped through the twisted vines of the rusted front gate. The mansion loomed silently under the moonlight, its windows black as empty eyes. Inside, the air was colder than she remembered. The fire hadn't touched most of the structure, only one upstairs room, Lyle's. The rest remained untouched by time, like a decaying movie set. Claire's flashlight swept over the grand staircase, the tattered curtains, the eerie, motionless portraits that still hung on the walls. With trembling hands, she descended toward the basement door. This time, she was ready to open it. To her surprise, the heavy door wasn't locked anymore. It creaked open under the pressure of her hand, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. The air was thick with mildew, dust, and something else, something metallic, almost like blood. She covered her mouth with her sleeve and stepped down, one cautious foot at a time. The light from her flashlight flickered as she reached the bottom and found herself in a low-ceilinged cellar filled with old film equipment. Projectors, reels, lighting rigs, and a row of vintage editing tables covered in cobwebs. Against one wall stood a large wooden trunk with brass fittings. On its lid was a burned-in carving, for eyes that see beyond. Inside the trunk, she found several canisters of film marked in fading white letters. Private, 1952, property of V.S. Her heart thudded. Vivian Seraphine, the original owner of the estate. Claire placed one reel onto the dusty projector sitting in the corner and plugged it into a backup generator she'd brought. The film clicked and sputtered to life, casting flickering shadows on the stone wall. The footage began in grainy black and white. A lavish candlelit room. Hollywood stars seated around a table, hands joined, eyes closed. Claire recognized some of them instantly. Bogart, Monroe, Dean, and others lost to history. A woman in a dark gown presided at the head of the table, Vivian herself. Her voice, though distorted by age and decay, rang clear with chilling authority. We gather under the veil, seeking those who've gone ahead. Let the house hear us. Let the spirits perform once more. As the seance began, the camera wobbled slightly. Candles flickered. At first, there was only silence. Then came the sound, a low, droning hum. One by one, the participants opened their eyes, their expressions vacant. Monroe gasped. Dean began to tremble violently. Bogart clutched his chest and whispered, "She's here again." Suddenly, Vivian's gaze snapped to the camera. The footage jittered violently, as if whatever force was conjured had become aware of the lens. In a flash, the film cut to black. Claire stared at the blank screen, her skin prickling with ice. Then, without warning, the projector resumed on its own, this time showing a new scene. A narrow hallway, this very basement, but decades earlier. A younger Vivian stood in the corner, speaking to someone off-screen. "They must never leave," she whispered. "If they're seen, they're remembered. And if they're remembered, they remain." The camera turned, revealing someone else. A young woman filming with an old handheld camera, dressed in 1950s attire. Claire's breath caught. It was her. Her exact face. Her posture. The same birthmark on the side of her neck. But this couldn't be possible. The woman on screen turned toward the lens, clearly confused, mouthing words, but there was no sound. Only the crackling of film. She looked behind her, as if someone had called her name. The reel ended. Claire stood frozen in the darkness, unable to move, unable to speak. It was undeniable now. She had been here before, or someone who looked exactly like her, or she was caught in something far more terrifying, an echo of time, replaying the same haunted story again and again. The Seraphine estate was not a home. It was a loop, a reel of film stuck on repeat, binding those it touched. The house didn't just trap spirits. It rewrote them. It cast them in roles. Claire stumbled back up the stairs, her mind spinning. Outside, the night was silent, but she could hear something now behind her, following up the steps. A faint voice in a smoky rasp, echoing behind her like dialogue from an old film. "Cut. Let's try that scene again." She ran. Claire didn't remember how she got home that night. One moment she was sprinting out of the basement of the Seraphine estate, heart pounding like a drumbeat, and the next she was in her apartment, her camera on the kitchen table, the door locked behind her. She sat on the floor for hours, trembling, her mind refusing to organize what she had seen. Her own face in a decades-old reel. A seance that ended in madness. A voice directing her like she was part of some twisted film. And now, the whispers. They hadn't stopped. They were faint at first, like a radio playing from another room, but they grew louder with each hour. Claire could hear lines of dialogue, quotes from films she had never watched but somehow knew by heart. Her voice changed slightly when she spoke aloud, adopting an old Hollywood rhythm, her consonants sharp, her vowels rounded. At first, she laughed it off. Maybe it was just exhaustion, stress. But then she looked in the mirror. For a split second, her reflection was smiling back when she wasn't. She recoiled. Her breathing grew shallow as she approached the mirror again, slower now. Her reflection seemed delayed, just a half-second behind, but enough to make her blood run cold. Then her lips moved again, without her control. Her own voice, deeper, older, raspier, echoed from her throat. "You're doing fine, kid. Just stay in character." Claire screamed and staggered away, knocking over a lamp. Her body didn't feel like her own anymore. It was as though something else had entered her, an actor taking control of a stage that once belonged to her. The following days blurred together. She lost time, entire hours vanishing with no memory. When she checked her camera footage, she saw clips she didn't remember filming, black and white monologues delivered straight to the lens. Her makeup perfectly vintage, her voice unmistakably from another era. She'd watch herself quote Bogart, Betty Davis, and James Dean, all while her eyes held that same blank, ghostly glaze as the seance participants. Even her apartment began to transform. Movie posters she'd never hung now adorned her walls. Her wardrobe filled with 1950s dresses and gloves. Her phone and laptop flickered constantly, sometimes replaced with static or eerie music from forgotten films. And always, there were whispers in the background. Desperate, Claire tried to reach out. She called friends, colleagues, even a local paranormal investigator. No one answered. Voicemails wouldn't send. Texts failed. It was as if she had been erased from the present. Even her apartment manager claimed no one named Claire Whitmore lived in Unit 3B. In one final act of defiance, Claire smashed her camera, hoping to break the connection. But the screen blinked one last time before going dark, displaying a chilling message in golden Hollywood font. Scene 6. Possession. Take 2. It wasn't just haunting her. It was directing her. And then the dreams returned, more vivid than ever. Claire would find herself on massive sound stages lit by hanging studio lamps, surrounded by faceless crew members. She'd walk through sets that mirrored her life. Her childhood home, her college dorm, the Seraphine estate. But in each dream, someone watched her from behind camera. Someone tall, in a trench coat, with a fedora pulled low. Bogart. But this wasn't the charming, cigarette-wielding Bogart of Casablanca. His face was distorted, melted slightly at the edges, as if time and memory were unraveling him. His eyes were hollow, his mouth twitching as he delivered the same cryptic line each night. "They don't want to leave, Claire. And now, neither do you." On the third night of these dreams, Claire awoke to find her bedroom mirror covered in writing, scribbled backwards like from the inside. Dozens of film titles that had never existed. The Forgotten Starlet, Eternal Curtain Call, Claire Whitmore, A Hollywood Tragedy. The final line etched in thick black ink read, "You're not acting anymore." Claire was no longer sure where she ended and the role began. She couldn't tell if she was living in reality or trapped inside some unfinished, eternal film. Her own identity was being overwritten, her voice no longer her own, her reflection a stranger. She wasn't haunted. She was becoming part of the house's cast, and there were still 2 more acts to go. Claire no longer recognized the woman in the mirror. Her eyes had become distant, rimmed with dark circles, and her expression held a tragic grace she hadn't known she was capable of. She barely left her apartment, but when she did, the world outside looked wrong, muted, like it had been filmed through an old lens. People didn't respond to her. Cars didn't stop, and shadows lingered where they shouldn't. Time had started folding in on itself. She could hear whispers in alleyways. She saw reflections in store windows that didn't match her own movements. And everywhere she went, one word seemed to follow her: encore. On the 7th night, Claire received a knock on her door. No one had visited her in days. Her phone still wouldn't connect. The buzzer hadn't worked in over a year. Yet there it was, a soft, deliberate knock. She opened the door slowly, expecting no one. But standing before her was a tall, silver-haired woman in an elegant black coat, holding a leather briefcase. Her lipstick was blood red, her eyes sharp and calculating. "You must be Claire," she said with a clipped, smoky voice. "I am Astrid Monroe. I represent the archive." Claire blinked, confused. "What archive?" "The archive of unfinished performances," the woman replied without hesitation. "You've been selected for preservation." Claire's blood ran cold. Astrid stepped inside without being asked, walking directly to Claire's desk as if she had been there before. She opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, worn with age. Inside were photos, Claire's face, but in dozens of different eras. One showed her dancing in a 1920s flapper dress. Another depicted her beside a gramophone. One chilling image caught her standing behind Vivian Seraphine herself, eyes hollow, smiling faintly. "These are from your previous lives," Astrid said calmly. "You see, Claire, some stars are born again and again. The Seraphine estate doesn't just haunt. It casts." Claire shook her head, backing away. "This is insane. You're lying. I'm not part of this. I didn't agree to this." Astrid simply tilted her head. "Did you step into the house?" "Yes." "Then you agreed." Claire dropped into a chair, her body trembling. "Why me?" "Because Hollywood feeds on stories that never end," Astrid said. Vivian opened a channel with her rituals, a binding between spirit and performance. That house became the epicenter. It selects people whose lives echo tragedy. It traps them in cycles, makes them part of its legend. Every few decades, the story must be retold. You're this generation's offering. Claire's voice cracked. "And what if I leave? Destroy the house? Burn it down?" Astrid smiled gently. "Others have tried. Some set fire to the rooms. Some fled the country. But the house isn't a building anymore. It's a story. And you, my dear, are a character." Claire stared at the folder again. It was full of stage directions, old scripts, sheet music, all bearing her name. The final page read, Act 8, Acceptance. The starlet returns to the stage. Astrid began to leave, but paused at the door. "You have one choice left," she said. "You can either surrender, or you can finish the performance." That night, Claire visited a psychic recommended by an online forum for unresolved spirits. The woman, Maria, was nearly blind, but the moment Claire stepped into her candlelit parlor, Maria gasped. "You've been marked," she said. "You brought the theater with you." Claire explained everything, Bogart, the footage, the dreams. Maria listened patiently, then nodded gravely. "You're not haunted by a ghost. You're haunted by a curse. The kind built by ambition, blood, and memory." Maria described the Seraphine estate as a spiritual recording device, one that captured souls in roles, feeding off recognition and memory. The only way to break the cycle was to perform the cleansing ritual that Vivian had stolen from an old occult text, but altered to keep the souls bound. If Claire could find the original words and perform it truthfully, she might sever her connection. "There is risk," Maria warned. "If you're too late, the ritual won't save you. It will complete the transformation. You'll become another legend, remembered, replayed, but never released." With no time left, Claire made her decision. She would return to the estate one last time. But this time, she wouldn't be playing their script. She would write her own ending. Claire arrived at the Seraphine estate just after midnight, dressed in a long black coat that fluttered behind her like a stage curtain. She had memorized the cleansing ritual from Maria's notes, now scribbled in her trembling hand. Her voice was raw from rehearsing the incantations, lines not meant for cameras, not meant for fame, but meant to release trapped souls. As she stepped through the rusted gates one last time, the wind whispered through the trees like an audience settling before the final act. She knew the house was waiting, watching. Inside, the estate had changed. The dust was gone. The chandeliers glowed as if freshly polished. The piano in the foyer played softly on its own, a familiar melody echoing through the halls. As time goes by, and portraits on the walls, once dull and lifeless, now shimmered with detail, eyes blinking, mouths twitching as if struggling to speak. The house was alive, breathing, performing. And Claire? She was no longer just a visitor. She descended into the basement once more, flashlight in one hand, the ritual page in the other. The steps creaked under her weight, echoing like drumbeats. At the base of the stairs, she found the seance room exactly as it had appeared in the film reel. Candles placed in a circle, the projector still standing in the corner, reels ready to roll. As she stepped inside, the film began to play by itself, casting flickering images on the wall. Scenes from Claire's past, but also from past lives. Her face in different decades, different clothes, different deaths. She didn't flinch. Claire stepped into the circle of candles and lit each one by hand, reciting the ancient words under her breath. As she spoke, the temperature dropped. Whispers filled the air, hundreds of voices murmuring lines from scripts long forgotten. Shadows gathered at the edge of the room. And then, he appeared. Bogart, or whatever remained of him. He stood at the edge of the circle, his face half hidden in shadows, that iconic trench coat clinging to a body that seemed more smoke than flesh. But his eyes, those weary, knowing eyes, locked with Claire's. She expected malice. Instead, there was sadness. "You made it to the final reel," he said softly. "Most don't." Claire didn't lower her gaze. "Why me?" Bogart stepped closer, careful not to break the candlelight. "Because you remember. And because you care enough to ask questions. That's the curse, kid. This place thrives on memory, on pain, on reruns of regret. I want to end it. You can try, but the house won't go quietly. It's addicted to applause." With that, the walls began to shudder. The projector flared, throwing scenes onto every surface. Vivian dancing in candlelight, Monroe screaming, Dean staring blankly into a cracked mirror. The floor beneath Claire pulsed like a beating heart. The house was fighting back. Claire raised her voice, reciting the final words of the ritual. "I return these names to silence. I free these roles from memory. Let the curtain fall." A blinding white light erupted from the center of the circle. The candle flames exploded upward. The shadows shrieked. The images flickered violently, breaking, bending, twisting. And through it all, Claire stood firm, her voice unwavering. One by one, the apparitions began to dissolve. Monroe, Dean, Margaret Vale, each fading with expressions of peace. Bogart was last. He tipped his hat toward Claire, a small, grateful smile on his lips. "Goodbye, kid." And then he was gone. The projector shattered. The reels burned. The house began to collapse, not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. Its hold on the world of the living severed. Claire collapsed to her knees, gasping for breath. The footage was discovered a week later by a film student hiking through the hills. Claire's camera, cracked but intact, was found beside the shattered remains of the Seraphine Gate. Authorities never found her body. The mansion was still there, but hollow. No portraits, no piano, no candles. Just dust and decay. The documentary Claire had started appeared on her cloud drive days later. No one knew how it uploaded. Titled Hollywood Hauntings, it became an underground cult classic. The final scene shows Claire in the basement, looking into the camera, saying a single line, "Stories don't end until someone says cut." Then the screen fades to black. And if you watch closely, just before the credits roll, Bogart's shadow passes across the frame one last time. 59.